Testing 1, 2, 3. Cool. So, seems like we're online. Got some guests joining us. Welcome everybody. I saw that I did a Thanksgiving stream last year, so I decided, sure, why not do a Thanksgiving stream this year as well. I'm being slightly contrarian. I guess I'm not really like quote unquote celebrating Thanksgiving. And we'll talk about this American tradition, though it's even hard to say it's really an American tradition in certain ways because of the specific groups associated with this tradition of some people. But enough of that. Let's get started and get into the Thanksgiving stream. So I'll be watching the chat throughout the stream. It's going to be pretty casual and laid back. I'll just keep on narrating and going on about topics. So if you're driving or lifting weights or walking in circles or waiting for someone or whatever, I think you could enjoy a nice chat here and also expect your messages and your comments to be acknowledged. That's one of the cool parts about the streaming medium. Of course, like watching a video or something, you could do it at your own convenience, but this whole streaming thing is something kind of new, that it's like you could have like a decentralized seminar. So in many ways it's quite extraordinary what people are able to do. So let's start. So I announced this topic, and our guest here, Reaper Grimm, who often counter signals me, saw my topic here, and I wouldn't exactly call it pushback, but it's kind of like, oh, you American, just from the comfort of your armchair, instead of being so negative or whatever, why don't you actually talk about what you're thankful for? So I think I have a adequately edgy, but also insightful answer for this question. So let me offer this and hear what you all have to say. So I think a mature man answer to this question of what are you thankful for, one of the answers I think that will not be so common, but I think is something that I need to meditate more upon and understand better, is suffering. Because through suffering, we learn knowledge of good and evil. And it is only through suffering and sacrifice, ultimately, that we make progress. So I have a quote here. Here's Alan. He's making a stream about Thanksgiving. So forgive my voices here. We're just having a little bit of fun. Just saying, there are lots of people that have less than us Americans. Like they are actually hungry or don't have a place to sleep, stay warm, etc. That is true. So, in America, it's true. For many, many Americans, we're relatively comfortable by many metrics. However, are Americans doing better, happier? Do you look at do you feel inspired looking at, a lot of Americans having a chillaxed time? So I wrote here a little note. So we'll answer and look at other topics, including self-satisfied Protestantism. So I'm going to be talking a bit about religion, and I think that it's a very appropriate thing for Thanksgiving, because it's closely associated with this whole Puritans and Protestant matters. And also I wanted to bring up, related to this quote here, about Americans having a lot to be thankful for in terms of material comforts. There's the well-known novel 1984, So it's totally politically correct to talk about totalitarian bad. I mean, this is the whole thing about Putler, right? You can call Putler bad as much as you want, because it's like, oh, Putler, he censors journalists. Putler, he oppresses people. So I'm not saying Putler doesn't do tyrannical things, but just say in America, it's very politically correct and easy to understand. Putler bad. Similarly, you could go on your Netflix or choose your favorite video streaming, Amazon, whatever, Hulu, and I'm sure that they have shows about this theme of totalitarianism bad. What isn't talked about as much is something that the novel Brave New World illustrates at length, which is something that I think we are closer to having here in the United States, which is enslavement by pleasures or behavior and chemical means. So I read this novel like fairly recently, within the past couple years. But like people would go to, I think what would be kind of similar to movies or even streaming, which is what they would call in the novel like feelies or something, like basically these shows that have music and sounds or whatever, visuals in order to make you feel good. And like it would be typical for two people to go to these feelies together, or people to do this in groups. So I'm going to say in many ways this is similar to what we see in a lot of self-satisfied Protestantism. A lot of the so-called Christianity in America is a Protestant religion in these days, takes those forms. Not to say there's not varying degrees and different sorts of it, but a lot of it is like that. And then, of course, we're seeing here behavioral and chemical means. If you search for topics such as coping mechanisms, or basically anything related to mental health, you're going to see tons and tons of stuff basically related to just behavior and chemical means in order to distract us from suffering, or arrange our bodies to get rid of suffering in various capacities. So a lot of this is trying to treat like the totality of human life as saying the totality of everything is this material created world. So then we have basically we hack the world. So by doing various practices, whether it's yoga or therapy or like all these things, the idea is that you could reduce suffering and enjoy the pleasures. So that's an approach I would say that in one form or another, probably the majority of society is engaged in that sort of thing. Whereas on the other hand, the orthodox approach, which I myself have chosen, is to actually embrace the suffering and use the suffering. So in Christian speak, you could say take up your cross specifically, and through that we learn the knowledge of good and evil, and we transform ourselves. It's not just, oh yes, I believe this, therefore I'm saved, right? Through actually interacting with the world and suffering in our bodies and our beings, then we are transformed or purified through our suffering, is another angle to this. So right now, was thinking about this topic a lot because I'm reading this book. This is actually a pretty rare book I'm holding right here. I'm borrowing it from a friend, Father Seraphim Rose's Life and Works. It's a biography of a very extraordinary individual who, if you look up, I think that if you're a suffering individual and look up the life of this man, Father Seraphim Rose, you will not be disappointed. Okay, let's take a look at the chat. So, Reaper docks himself. He says, I'm getting quoted. And he says, Alan is saying, no pain, no gain. I mean, right, so there is a lot of wisdom in bro science. Let's add this to the notes, because that's kind of funny. Good job, Reaper. You're being quote worthy. Wisdom in bro science. No pain, no gain. Yes, and I think this hits on like a lot of the problems with American culture these days. I'll bring up one opinion I had. So let's see. Let me make sure my notes. Yes, my notes are up. Okay, so like one opinion I have on Thanksgiving, the holiday of Thanksgiving in America, for example, is there's nothing inherently wrong about people coming together to share a meal together. Like this is a normal, natural, fine thing to do. But we can't just look at like it's Thanksgiving, turkey and mashed potatoes and gravy and specific things. So something like that, that's like only highlighting the pleasures of Thanksgiving. And then for a lot of people, like I see this in my own experience, it's something like this. They'll be saying, well, I don't really like Thanksgiving food. I prefer to eat fried chicken over turkey. Cranberry sauce, kind of yuck. I don't want stuffing. I like pineapple fried rice. Okay. I do like pineapple fried rice. That sounds pretty good. Okay, so it's like a focus on all the pleasures. So when people talk about what they like about Thanksgiving, oftentimes it'll be all these positive things, such as saying, I get to see family, I get to see friends, I get to enjoy the food, right? And then the people that kind of, quote unquote, don't like Thanksgiving, a lot of the times it might be of a sort of similar vein of saying the same thing, which is like saying, oh, I don't really like to see, gathered together with their family. So they don't like Thanksgiving because they don't like what other people enjoy. Maybe they don't get along with some family members or something. So all of those kind of perspectives, though, I think fall under this sort of being thankful for pleasures. And I think it's a kind of, I don't really have to explain or talk about like the fact that if you eat ice cream, it tastes like there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to explain. This is another reason why like a lot of like I was the president of a Japanese conversation club, and after a while I got kind of bored. So I started talking about like conspiracy theories, and like on this stream I talk about a lot of philosophy, religion type stuff because this was a lot more interesting to me. I mean, if I ask a question like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? I mean, there's nothing really to say to it. It's like if you're like vanilla and I'm like, here, vanilla ice cream. It's like that's it. And of course, if we're sitting next to each other, we can enjoy it together. But there's only so much you could say or do about that. Like, nobody is going to talk about. Well, I won't say nobody in this day and age, but if you're just scrolling and looking at pictures of delicious food, I mean, even if you're the person who suffers and actually makes these things, then maybe you could continue doing that for a long time and it will be interesting. But usually, if we just saturate ourselves in pleasure, basically we just start to like rot away and we die. And it's like, that is choosing death. Okay, another comment by Reaper. Reaper says, quote, History 1982. When actress Jane Fonda began to produce a series of aerobics workout videos. In these videos, Fonda would use no pain, no gain, and feel the burn as catchphrases. All right, yeah. I mean, it's true. You do some aerobics, you're going to feel some pain. And like, let's be honest about some stuff. I mean, for people that, let's say, you like to work out, you like to go to the gym, a lot of that experience is going to be like pain and, you don't like it. But it's like overall, there's something about putting in that pain and there's a suffering and you gain a result from that. You're transformed through that pain and suffering that you do. So it's like, okay, if somebody says, my hobbies are like shopping and eating food, okay, typically like these acts of consumption, you would associate these with being like all pleasure. So really that doesn't tell you much about someone besides saying, like, oh, I'm a person and I find pleasure out of things that most people find pleasurable. It doesn't tell you much. On the other hand, if you look at different individuals and you look at the different sorts of suffering that they've willingly gone through, then you could really get a sense of what sort of person they are, and this ultimately will be what's like inspiring about people. And it could be, some things could be like struggles people take upon themselves. Other things might be challenges that a person didn't choose. So, for instance, like a lot of people, they like cancer survivors, people who endure through some like very painful illness or injury, something like that. We could look at that person and say, wow, that's a very strong and admirable person. If even despite all this pain, all this suffering, they go through that, and then at the end of the day, they're cheerful and giving to the people that talk to them. They're not like, my stomach hurts, so I'm, hangry and you suck. It's like, despite pain and all these difficult circumstances, if somebody transcends beyond that and still chooses to like not complain, not bitch and moan, excuse the language, then that shows, wow, this person has virtue. This person has good character. So let's go back to the Thanksgiving note here. So looking at Thanksgiving, what are you thankful for? Oftentimes, the American focus is on pleasures, brainlet tear, obviously no explanation needed, just nice things. But we need to seek and go beyond that and say, what actually makes life worth living? Because one day, all the ice cream cones, they're all gonna go away. It might come sooner or later. Let's say you get a dental implant, and now you can't tolerate cold in your mouth at all, like it's super painful. Well, your days of ice cream are over. So something like that could happen to any of us. Now, if something like that happened to you, would you be like, life is no longer worth living? That would be an indication that you are enslaved by some kind of pleasure. And I myself am saying this stuff because obviously I'm not totally liberated from the passions. I'm not like a dispassionate person. There are dispassionate people, but I'm not yet one of them. Maybe one day I'll become one with a lot of work. But yeah, a lot of us, through our attachments to a lot of just immediate, nice, pleasant things, we undermine ourselves. So like, I'll just say one thing about myself. Like I like food and drink that taste good. So you could be like, why aren't you like super like jacked and really good looking and making the best of every day? And I would say, criticism received. I'm not disagreeing with how you're evaluating the situation. It's like, because sometimes I just want to eat an extra piece of pizza, and instead of working out, I want to go just do an easy workout, like just walk in a circle or do a live stream. So instead of pushing myself and going harder and being more disciplined, a lot of times, I'll choose kind of a low resistant, easy route. One could look at that and say, so you're not fulfilling your potential. You're not doing the best you can. And it's like, no defense. That's true. That's how it is. All right, couple comments. Reaper says, tell us more about your pizza coping. Hecka says, this stream has now been monetized by Domino's. All right. Yeah, pizza coping. This word coping, I think like it's one of these great slangs that has entered common parlance now. So coping, let's define coping as something like working around but not addressing the actual problem directly. And I'm actually going to pull up a picture of a coping saw because it's related because I want to show you maybe how this word I don't know if this is the real etymology, but this is how I understand it. So a coping saw, it's like you can see the blades really thin. So oftentimes if you have like a crown molding something that has to fit up against a wall, so let's search coping saw crown. You'll use like a coping saw to like work around and make the corner exactly the correct shape that you're seeing. So you'll see people are using these coping saws to make these very complex cuts. You couldn't just use a straight, more efficient type saw. You have to use a thin and squiggly saw. So this is you dealing with your problems. You see, you're coping. All right, I see some pizza emotes in the chat. I gotta cope. I gotta get a piece of this fun. Okay. Right. So coping is like instead of dealing with the problem directly, you're kind of working it around. So like let's say you have a problem, like say I feel like I'm a nobody. I'm not meeting my potential, and life just keeps on going around. I'm envious of my friends. Look, that person's more successful than me. That person's more successful than me, and so on. So a person like that, and I think like a lot of people have these sorts of thoughts. Like I'll say I have these sort of thoughts sometimes, right? How do you deal with it? So one way would just be like, shut up and work on your own path. I would say that's probably the correct answer most of the time. For instance, like I don't care how much weights Reaper lifts. I just have to work on my own journey. I just lift my weights myself. Don't argue with Reaper about weightlifting on the internet. Just lift your own weights. Just shut up and do your own thing. Like that's probably the correct answer a lot of the time. But a lot of times instead, what we do is we cope. So I might say, oh, pizza tastes good. I haven't had lunch yet. I was going to eat, I don't know, just vegetables. But instead, I'm going to eat pizza because it tastes good. And I might be sitting there, like, eating pizza and actually watching videos of people lifting weights. And I think, like, a lot of, it doesn't just have to be, like, weightlifting. Like, some other examples, here in the chat, we got Link. He's a musician. And Link's being serious about learning how to play some music. So if you wanted to be serious about learning how to play music, obviously you actually have to not just listen to music, like, walk around and play it on your headphones and, do other stuff. You actually have to, like, actively listen and put in lots of effort into do it. So listen carefully, notice patterns, and obviously you got to actually practice. You actually have to put in the work, and this is what we're going to be talking about too in here. So the bro science and the no pain and the no gain. What is the way in which somebody is able to truly enjoy something a lot like art or music? Well, if you're somebody who does it yourself, you know how hard it is to, play a particular piece or to produce a particular sort of image. By having suffered and gone through a lot of that stuff, then, you are actually going to be able to understand and experience a greater pleasure to realize how excellent something is. So we'll say, too, about American Thanksgiving. So it's just celebrating the pleasures, the ups of stuff. And nothing wrong, with these ups, enjoying these things that you could say are like little consolations in life during our struggle for whatever we're trying to do. Nothing wrong with those. But, for instance, I'm sure if you fasted 3 days and then ate a piece of bread, dude, that piece of bread's going to taste great. Like, if you haven't tried that at least once in your life, Try it out. Like, I'm pretty sure it'll work. Just go 20 hours without drinking water and then drink some water. Not medical advice. Not medical advice. Don't sue me. But if you did that, then like I'm sure that sip of water would taste great. So in America, oftentimes, as we were saying, a lot of people that have less than us Americans are actually hungry. They don't have a place to sleep. You know what? And a lot of times those same people, if you did these like surveys or psychological tests, those people are actually they would rate themselves as much happier. I don't really like this word happy, but we'll use it for the sake of appeasing Skeletor here. They would be much happier than Americans. All right. Link says Russian just for documentation purposes. I'll try to read. I'll try to read the Russian, so in the future I could say, "Oh, did my Russian actually improve?" He says, "Just tlivo dia blagodarenia Alan." So I think that's something about Happy Thanksgiving. That was terrible. Right. Link says practice with intent. That is the most important thing. And also, your 10,000 hours don't matter if you spent them doing absolutely everything for 1 hour. Okay, so Link's talking about like practice and the effort that we put in. And this relates directly again to coping. Okay, so a lot of the times what coping is rather than directly addressing the one thing that is important, you would do 10,000 other things. So like, let's say, give an example. Someone's like, I'm lonely, something, because they haven't committed to a relationship. So because they're lonely, then they might try, cooking, 5 different sports, read 1,000-page books, climb Mount Everest, whatever it is that they do. And, it's like nothing inherently wrong with any of those activities. But maybe there's just one problem they need to just spend 1 hour with and make a decision about. And then if they did that, then, they wouldn't have to do all these million different coping activities. And then they could move forward and do something else. So I think some good points by Link there. Cool. All right. So, yeah, I'll just close up this one topic and just summarize it saying, so Thanksgiving in America, I think that one big problem that we have in America is that we celebrate these, like, we try to make and only celebrate feasts. But what would be the equivalent of like a fasting period is pretty absent from American culture. So people oftentimes the only exposure to sort of aesthetic stuff people get is things that they don't choose themselves. So for instance, you might be a happy-go-lucky person, and then you get cancer, or someone close to you gets cancer, something like that. So it's like you didn't choose to engage in some kind of asceticism yourself, but the way life works is whether you like it or not, everybody is going to come across suffering difficulties. One might call this, the spiritual law or God's law. So there's fact. Okay, fact. If you want to try to fact check me, go ahead, but I don't think you'll be able to. There's no avoiding of suffering. That's just a fact of the universe. No, you cannot avoid suffering. However, the specific types of suffering you might experience and whether that suffering is something that you could improve or grow from, that is, a lot of the times, that is for you to decide. You can't decide all the specifics. Like, obviously, if you get, like, cancer, you can't just wish it away and it will magically go away. Like, you can't do it like that, right? But it could be like, you get some disease and you could bear it with a noble bearing. You could bear it in a certain way, And who knows? Maybe you won't be healed. Maybe you will be healed. I don't know. Um, but you could transform that suffering, and turn it to good. Or, right, you could just like complain and like drag everyone down to hell with you. So suffering is a universal that all people experience. Um, and I'm saying here for Thanksgiving, I think one thing that we could remind ourselves to do, is to, don't hate, despise, or just cope and try to get rid of suffering. If instead, whatever suffering we're going through, we try to understand it and then use that suffering in order to fix ourselves, and through doing so, also begin to heal the people and the things around us, um, then suffering's going to come whether we like it or not. So how do we deal with it? This is a big question. So if you're interested more in this topic, the big brain word is theodicy here. Also related to this topic is the so-called problem of evil. So here I'll just read this first paragraph from this site, Patristic Faith. It's an Orthodox Christian site. Says, our Orthodox Christian theology views evil not as a primeval essence that is co-eternal and equal with God. So this is in contrast with like Zoroastrianism and some other religions. It's like, yeah, it's a big cosmic battle from good and evil. By the Christian worldview, that is not so. Evil doesn't have its own essence or existence in the same way. Instead, it's a departure from what is good, but rather a fallen away from good. So evil does not exist in and of itself and was not created by God. The Orthodox Church rejects the Gnostic teaching that the entirety of being is made up of two realms which have forever existed together, the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. See, Emily says, sounds quite Taoist, as ultimately what has happened has happened. You see no difference between suffering and enjoyment. It's all just your life. Right, yeah. So there's a certain sense in which like we have to be like neutral or indifferent. So I think like the Taoists, the Stoics, like there's various approaches people might have to suffering. Like I think, for instance, like the Buddhists might say something about like your goal is actually to end all suffering, which you do by going into no non-being. I don't buy that. I don't support that. Not only do I think that's impossible, but I'm saying even if it was, it's not a good way to go. All right. Okay, one more paragraph, then I'll move on because I think this is good stuff. All right. So this darkness, evil, does not exist in its own right, but is simply the absence or lack of light. Evil, according to Saint Basil the Great, is not a living and animated substance, but a condition of the soul, which is opposed to virtue and which springs up in the slothful because of their falling away from good. Do not therefore contemplate evil from without, and do not imagine some original nature of wickedness, but let each one recognize himself as the first author of the vice that is in him. Cool. So you could see the title of this and some of the names and resources I shared if you're interested more in that. But to close up this topic, yes. So what are you thankful for this year? I'm gonna actually say yes. I'm thankful for suffering, and an answer like that, I think. If a 5-year-old said that to me, dude, that 5-year-old has some crazy wisdom, because I'm a kind of a slow boy, and it's it's taken me a while to come to this answer. But now I think I could say that and actually believe it. All right, cool. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get into talking and looking at Thanksgiving. So our establishment supporting member here, Reaper Grimm, kindly sent me an archive article so I don't have to deal with paywalls and blockers, to an article about the American tradition of Thanksgiving. So I have not read this before, but it doesn't look too long. So I think I'm just going to go through, read this article, and we could discuss things as they come up. So I'll be monitoring the chat and pausing every once in a while to give my own feedback on stuff. So it looks like we have a painting here titled "The First Thanksgiving at Plymouth" from 1914 by Jenny Augusta Brownscombe. And there's a man, he looks like to be some kind of leader of the community, who is standing with his hands in a praying position, and most people are seated around, bowing their heads at a table. Notably, they're outdoors. Everybody's mixed together, so men, women, children, some Native Americans sitting on the floor over here. I don't know how politically correct that is. I'm sure this article goes into that. But it's like, I would probably say this is a romantic style painting. 1914, so it's like late 19th century, early 20th century. A lot of paintings that had this similar sort of vibe were made. So let's get into this article. Maya Salam begins. Not to rain on your Thanksgiving Day parade, but the story of the first Thanksgiving as most Americans have been taught it, the Pilgrims and Native Americans gathering together, the famous feast, the turkey, is not exactly accurate. Thanksgiving facts and Thanksgiving myths have blended together for years like so much gravy and mashed potatoes, and separating them is just as complicated. All right. We'll give you an A for your catchy little cutesy intro. Good job, Journo. I tip my fedora to you. All right. Blame school textbooks with details often so abridged, softened, or out of context that they are ultimately made false. Children's books that simplify the story to its most pleasant version, or animated television specials like The Mouse on the Mayflower, which first aired in 1968, that not only misinformed a generation, but also enforced a slew of cringe-worthy stereotypes. High school textbooks are particularly bad about stating absolutes because these materials, quote, teach history by giving students facts to memorize even when the details may be unclear, said James W. Lowen, a sociologist and the author of Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong. That mindset pervades everything they talk about, and certainly Thanksgiving, he said. Now, I just want to pause for a second. Note, so this article, I'm sure there's going to be like a lot of correct information in this article. When are we going to start to see this sort of article about the Big 9 event in New York, or even the tin can that supposedly broke through the firmament and went to the big rock in the sky? So we'll be getting more into this and like social conditioning and all sorts of stuff like that. But it's like, nowadays I would say Christmas for a long time has been a fair punching bag, especially on TV. But yeah, so this article I think is representative of saying, you're free to bash on Puritans and Thanksgiving. So, nothing wrong with like correcting the historical narrative and stuff like that if like truly, false claims are being purported. But let's also remember that, these same textbooks we have, they also tell you things about other more recent events that are still, fact-checked if you start to talk about them. All right, we have an audible groan in the chat. Hecka says, what textbooks are they referring to? They taught me that Thanksgiving was some sort of massacre in school. So maybe this person's a bit older than us. I was kind of given, and we'll note here, I've mentioned this on stream. Nowadays, like history class, oftentimes is called like social studies as opposed to history class. And I too got a lot of the progressive sort of stuff. But, who knows? We'll continue. All right, so the Mayflower did bring the Pilgrims to North America from Plymouth, England in 1620. And they disembarked at what is now Plymouth, Massachusetts, where they set up a colony. In 1621, they celebrated a successful harvest with a 3-day gathering that was attended by members of the Wampanoag tribe. It is from this that we derive Thanksgiving as we know it. So probably first recorded 1620, successful harvest. Then you had white man and some brown red people. So here's a photograph, and it says members of Plymouth 400, a non-profit that contends that the Thanksgiving story began in 1614 when Tisquantum, known as Squanto, and other native people were captured, taken to Europe, and sold as slaves. All right. But it wasn't until the 1830s that this event was called the first Thanksgiving by New Englanders, who looked back and thought it resembled their version of the holiday, said Kate Sheehan, a spokeswoman for Plymouth Plantation, a living history museum in Plymouth. The holiday wasn't made official until 1863, when President Abraham Lincoln declared it as a kind of thank you for the Civil War victories in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, I think. Forgive my lack of East Coast knowledge. I'm a ignorant Californian. Reaper says social studies is not a new term, and it is related to a combination of history and civil teach, how government works, culture, etc. Hecka says, a spokeswoman for Plymouth Plantation. That job description varies greatly depending on what year it is. Yes. So now we're in a post-PR industry era. But, in the 1830s, that was before PR was a big industry, as far as I know. All right. So Abraham Lincoln and Thanksgiving, big connection for making it official thing. Okay. Beyond that, claiming it was the first Thanksgiving isn't quite right either, as both Native American and European societies have been holding festivals to celebrate successful harvests for centuries, Mr. Lowen says. I mean, I don't think it would be a far stretch to say that, probably any agrarian, agricultural type society would have some way of holding festivals for successful harvests. I mean, I would guess it would be the exception to find a society that doesn't hold some kind of festival for a successful harvest. But I don't know. Fact check me if you question that statement. Let's continue. A prevalent opposing viewpoint is that the first Thanksgiving stemmed from the massacre of the Pequot people in 1637, a culmination of the Pequot War. While it is true that a day of Thanksgiving was noted in the Massachusetts Bay and the Plymouth colonies afterward, it is not accurate to say it was the basis for a modern Thanksgiving, Ms. Sheehan said. So Plymouth Rock in Pilgrim Memorial State Park in Plymouth, Massachusetts. There's a photograph of some people looking at a big rock. The rock, known as the landing place of the Pilgrims, was not mentioned in the Pilgrims' original writings. Instead, it is part of the region's oral history. All right. And Plymouth, Mr. Lowen noted, was already a village with clear fields and a spring when the Pilgrims found it. A lovely place to settle, he said. Why was it available? Because every single native person who had been living there was a corpse. Plagues had wiped them out. All right. Subheading. It wasn't just about religious freedom. It's been taught that the Pilgrims came because they were seeking religious freedom, but that's not entirely true, Mr. Lowen said. The Pilgrims had religious freedom in Holland, where they first arrived in the early 17th century. Like those who settled Jamestown, Virginia in 1607, the Pilgrims came to North America to make money, Mr. Lowen said. They were also coming here in order to establish a religious theocracy, which they did, he said. That's not exactly the same as coming here for religious freedom. It's kind of coming here against religious freedom. Also, the Pilgrims never called themselves Pilgrims. They were separatists, Mr. Lowen said. The term Pilgrim didn't surface until around 1880. So, just a couple notes on this. Pilgrims with a capital P, all except what Mr. Lowen is saying. Maybe they started saying Pilgrims with a capital P around 1880, which is, not, that's pretty recent history. But obviously, there has been something called pilgrimages for a long time. So I think most people know that, like, Muslims go on, pilgrim to go walk around the giant black cube thing and all that. But of course, Christians also have been going on pilgrimages for a long time. So the idea of pilgrims is nothing new. I mean, I think it goes probably goes back to the Old Testament, of the Bible. Not even just the New Testament, because I'm sure people in the olden times would travel in order to see important religious sites and stuff with Israel. So the term pilgrim is nothing new. Here, Mr. Lowen says they were separatists. So the Pilgrims, separatists from, I guess, the Anglican Church. Not much is specified about how they were separatists, but I bet that's true in many ways, that the Pilgrims were separatists. We have some interesting implications built into here. So there's this whole idea that the Pilgrims, they weren't going for religious freedom. They were leaving and going somewhere else to set up a theocracy. So I'm not going to dispute or fact check any of that. But you could ask the question, what does religious freedom mean? If religious freedom means that, it's just like you, and then in your head you could privately believe what you want, that's like, honestly, no one could actually take away your religious freedom. Like, you're always free to a certain capacity insofar as you're a human being. But if you're saying like religious freedom means me and some people that believe and think the same things want to go on our own way and set up camp and run things our way, then it's like, yeah, obviously they were going somewhere where they could go for religious freedom. So the author here, or Mr. Lowen, is saying that that's like theocracy. But in some ways you could say, like, isn't religious freedom, doesn't that essentially mean like you could set up like your own theocracy in a way, like on a kind of limited scale? What exactly is meant by religious freedom? So I think a lot of the times, we're talking about New York Times and stuff here. So a lot of times that subversive crowd likes to talk about freedom, including like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, insofar as they want to interject their agendas. And then once somebody starts exercising and using that freedom, then they'll start calling you names like, separatists, or you're using your freedom to go against freedom, or like, all this weird double think stuff. So the whole, religious freedom is kind of a troll, because if you really think about like what does religious freedom mean, and if the religious freedom fighter people basically say like all truth is relative, it's like, well, to make the claim that all truth is relative, you're making an absolutist claim, so you're not a respecter of religious freedom. You're being a goofball. So religious freedom, subheading: there's no evidence that native people were invited. So, start this paragraph. Possibly the most common misconception is that the Pilgrims extended an invitation to the Native Americans for helping them reap the harvest. The truth of how they all ended up feasting together is unknown. The English written record does not mention an invitation, and Wampanoag oral tradition does not seem to reach back to this event, Miss Sheehan said. But there are reasons the Wampanoag leader could have been there, she said, adding, his people had been planting on the other side of the brook from the colony. Another possibility is that after his harvest was gathered, he was making diplomatic calls. So we get some people role playing here. The Thanksgiving Day Parade in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 2012. So we have a nice white woman and an older gray mustache man with a frilly collar in front of, is this supposed to be the Mayflower or something? It says 1620 in an old looking font. Alright. It is true that the celebration was an exceptional cross-cultural moment with food, games, and prayer. The deadly conflict that came after, though, created an undercurrent that is glossed over. I thought this was a Miss Lowen. Did Miss Lowen change into Mr. Lowen? Oh no, it's Mr. Lowen. Oh, Miss Sheehan and Mr. Lowen. Okay. Said, still we might as well take shards of fairness and idealism and so on, whenever we find them in our past, and recognize and give credit to them, he said. Alright, so some people of different races might have got together and had a meal together. Now, let me just pause for a second and just say, like, if you study world history, like, you seriously start to look at how different cultures and stuff have contacted each other. I mean, there have been tons and tons and tons of different groups who have, like, met together and got along peacefully. So as an example from the non-Christian world, I'll bring up, like, Malaysia, okay? Malaysia has a history of, like, people gathering together and trading peacefully. So, they might all be brown, shades of brown people. But, different brown people are different brown people, They they might not believe the same things or like each other. I was thinking of, maybe I searched Trade Malay, the language here. Right, so I'll just read, like, a couple sentences. Okay. Also, Malay spread their inter-ethnic contact and trade across the Malay archipelago as far as the Philippines. That contact resulted in a lingua franca, trade language, that was called Bazaar Malay or Low Malay, and in Malay, Melayu Pasar. It is generally believed that Bazaar Malay was a pidgin, blah 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 blah, and then it just goes into some details. The point of that, though, this, like, linguistic thing I'm bringing up, is that to say, like, whoa, imagine the shock, like, white people and in a theocracy and brown people, like, sat together and had a food together. I mean, stuff like this has happened for a long, long time with all sorts of different people. I mean, we could even talk about how, like, a way a lot of times alliances and things were made would be families that are, different people groups coming together through marriages and things like that. So it wasn't always just, war, conquest, rape, and pillage. People would come together, form alliances, etc., in all sorts of ways throughout history. So, this sentence, it is true that the celebration was an exceptional cross-cultural moment with food, games, and prayer. I don't know. To me, it's like, I'm not saying it wasn't, a good time. But in other ways, it doesn't seem like a very, well, let's bring this back to the topic of the stream. So I was saying that at Thanksgiving, we could be thankful for suffering. To say that people could enjoy pleasures together, I mean, that's only, like, one level of, wow, surprising. Like, I'm sure you could hang out with people from a country you've never been to Like, you go and you have ice cream with Lithuanians. Like, I bet everybody will be nice to each other. You go and you have ice cream with, like, Ugandans. Like, everybody will smile and be nice to each other. Um, but if people actually, worked out or did difficult things together, endured all sorts of sufferings together, something like that, then suddenly um, that makes that connection more substantial. All right, let's read about Squanto a little bit. Tis quantum. Oh, quantum. Multiverse. Quantum. In the Tis quantum universe. Just kidding. Dumb jokes. Tis quantum, known as Squanto, did play a large role in helping the Pilgrims, as American children are taught. His people, the Patuxet, a band of the Wampanoag tribe, had lived on the site where the Pilgrims settled. When they arrived, he became a translator for them in diplomacy and trade with other native people and showed them the most effective method for planting corn and the best locations to fish, Miss Shion said. That's usually where the lesson ends, but that's just a fraction of his story. He was captured by the English in 1614 and later sold into slavery in Spain, Miss Shion said. He spent several years in England, where he learned English. He returned to New England in 1619, only to find his entire Patuxet tribe dead from smallpox. He met the Pilgrims in March 1621. And the final section, there's no evidence that turkey was served. So I'm just going to skip this paragraph because I don't care about the specifics of the food. Okay, so let's just summarize and talk about what this article was saying. So the title, very clickbaity. Everything you learned about Thanksgiving is wrong. And then it just questions the historic facts and says it wasn't as sort of rosy and nice as people might make it out to be. And in terms of like a harmonious event where people from different races, different cultures got together, basically this article is saying that might not have been as presented. And finally, beyond all that, it's saying, and the food that's a supposed tradition of this event, that might even be fake news. Okay, so let's just make a couple notes about the New York Times article. So let's copy this link, and I'm going to paste it in my notes, and I'm going to switch over to my notes view. So let's just summarize here. The narrative of, let's say, the first Thanksgiving typically given in schools and textbooks is historically dubious. All right, I think that sounds fair to say. I'll add especially in the details. And let's add, while Thanksgiving is typically associated, when spoken of positively, with thankfulness, obviously, and intercultural communication, something like that. I probably could think of something better. The historical facts point to a much messier reality. What else? To add gravy on the mashed potatoes. The so-called traditional Thanksgiving foods we know may have not been served at the original Thanksgiving. Copyright, trademark. All right. So there's my summary of that. And I think if there's anything else we could add here. So let's extend this. So what is Thanksgiving? So what is Thanksgiving today? Oftentimes, Thanksgiving is, well, Thanksgiving is let's start. Thanksgiving is a federal holiday. Many or most people have this day off from work or at least have reduced hours. So naturally, many people gather together for some kind of celebration. Thanksgiving dinners being the representative event. It is not uncommon for people to go to multiple Thanksgiving dinners, which speaks to the plurality of U.S. life. So, I want to bring this up because it as opposed to like a whole community coming together for a meal or something like that, the nature of Thanksgiving dinner or Thanksgiving in a lot of cases is like everybody breaks off and does their own thing. So in many ways, like I was just thinking about like Thanksgiving holiday, isn't just gathering together and like having food together, like isn't that what people are actually just supposed to be doing normally? So it's like it takes what's supposed to be normal, then tries to make it extraordinary, and then amplifies the complicatedness of it, and then a lot of people just like pat themselves on the back about it. Yeah. So New York Times says Thanksgiving is fake news. We could look at how Thanksgiving is often involved in kind of Brave New World sort of vibe of an emphasis on pleasures and comforts. And yeah, so in short, that's why I'm not particularly excited or interested in Thanksgiving, though I'm not counter signaling or like judging anyone if they like Thanksgiving or participate in Thanksgiving. I mean, we all have to work with what we're given. So in America, as I just mentioned here, Thanksgiving, it's a federal holiday, so it's one of those days, I think a lot of the time, where people might go ahead and try to do stuff or see people that normally they wouldn't see. And so I think, a lot of good could come out of this event, this, let's call it a civil calendar holiday type of thing. But if in the future, I don't know, like how long will people continue celebrating this? I mean, there's certain holidays, like all the Christian holidays, Pascha or Easter and Christmas being the prime examples, but other ones as well that have been observed for a long time and will continue to be observed. What will happen to Thanksgiving? Will it go the way of the dinosaur, so to speak? I don't know. We'll see how it turns out. All right, cool. Well, I think that about does it for the content I have. So thanks everybody that joined today. Looks like the concurrent viewers have reached 0, which is aight. Good to see a lot of you, at least at the beginning of the stream. And I hope everybody has a good rest of the day. Thank you.